Good evening, everyone. Stephen Duran, the Vice Chair. I'll be serving as the Chair tonight. Tonight is the March 11th, 2021 meeting of the Rent Control Board. It is now called to order. Would the Secretary please take the roll?
Yes, Commissioner Torosis.
Here.
Commissioner Foster.
Here.
Vice Chair Duran.
Here.
And we have Commissioner Phyllis joining us later, and Chairperson Sultan will be absent tonight.
Very good. Thank you very much. And just as a note, anyone wishing to address the board on a specific item on tonight's agenda should have contacted the board secretary prior to the meeting. We'll recognize the speakers and arrange to have them speak when it is their turn in the queue. All right, moving on to item number 5, approval of the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the board's minutes at the last meeting?
I've reviewed the minutes and I'd like to move to accept the minutes.
Okay, Commissioner Foster first, second. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Torosis. All right, would the Secretary like to take the roll call vote?
Yes, Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Commissioner Torosis.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Duran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Fantastic. Okay, moving on to item number 6, the special agenda items. This is about brief announcements, commendations, awards, and introductions or special guests. Just a note that no board action may be taken on these items, but are there anyone who would like to speak regarding the special agenda items? All right, Executive Director Condon, go ahead.
Yes, good evening, commissioners and members of the public. I have 3 announcements this evening. First, I just wanted to remind everybody that the eviction moratoria, both the local and state eviction moratoria, are in effect through June 30th. And for more information about those, you can contact our public information staff or check out our website where we have links to important information. I also want to mention that with funds from the Federal Consolidated Appropriation Act of 2021, the state is setting up a rental relief program to assist landlords and tenants. That application should be available within a week or 2. And for more information about that, you can check out housingiskey.com. That's the state website where they have a lot of information, and you will be able to get to the applications from that site. And finally, I wanted to mention that the city also has a cash assistance program available for seniors. This is the Preserving Our Diversity, or POD program, that has been around for a while. The City Council allocated additional funding to this year, so they are accepting applications continuously. It's for very low income people who are at least 65 years or older and have lived in their rent controlled unit since at least 2000. People can get cash assistance of up to $700 for a single person household or $1,225 per month for a household of 2 or more. So if you think you might be eligible for that, or if you know somebody who might be eligible for that, please contact the city's housing division for an application and more information. We also have a link to that on our website. And those are the announcements I have this evening.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ms. Condon. Moving on to public comments. And this is the time set aside for members of the public to address the board on matters that are not included on the agenda, but that are within the board's subject matter jurisdiction. Just as a reminder, the board cannot take official action at tonight's meeting on any matter that is not included on the agenda. Mr. Secretary, do you know, are there any requests to speak during the public comment?
No, there were no requests for public comment.
Very good. Okay. And public comment is closed. We'll move on to number 10, jurisdictional items. I have I have an appeal, case number M1004, and this is what is this? This is an appeal. The petitioner is Joanna Palacios, tenant Unit 3, and the appellant is 1433 Euclid Street, LLC. May we have a staff report, please?
Good evening, Commissioners. Before I begin, last time there was some issues with my audio. I want to make sure that my internet streaming is working well. Okay, great. So in this case, Joanna Palacios, who's the tenant in 1433 Euclid Street, Unit 3, filed an excess rent petition after her landlord raised her rent to market in late 2019 under the Costa-Hawkins Act provision that allows a landlord to increase the rent to market on a sublessee or assignee moved into a unit after 1995, even when the original tenant has moved out. The hearing officer found that Ms. Palacios had become an original tenant on her own, which made the Costa-Hawkins provision inapplicable, and therefore her landlord was liable for the excess rent that the LLC had collected. The LLC has appealed that decision. It first argues that the Court of Appeals decision in Cabinda v. Santa Monica Rent Control Board from 2000 precludes the board from deciding on Ms. Palacios' claim. That argument is without merit. First, that decision is unpublished, which means that it can't be cited as precedent or relied on by a party or a court except in subsequent proceedings in the same matter or between the same parties and those in privity to them as to claims and issues already decided in previous proceedings in that matter. To be in privity is to be a successor in interest or sufficiently close in interest in the earlier litigation. And this LLC in this matter was not a party in that suit, nor was it in any way in privity with that litigation. So that decision has no bearing on this case as precedent. Moreover, the controversy in that case was entirely distinct from the one that's here. Costa-Hawkins gave landlords the right to set the initial rent at any amount after voluntary vacancy. It set up a 3-year transition period in jurisdictions like Santa Monica with vacancy control. During this transition period, a landlord could raise the maximum allowable rent by 15% on 2 occasions after a voluntary vacancy. Responded by passing regulations that defined what voluntary vacancy meant, specifically that it precluded situations where the tenant had been forced to move because of harassment, and the board also set up a presumption of a sham tenancy if a tenant lasted less than 4 months. The Court of Appeal found that the board did not have authority to enact those regulations, applied and repealed them. Here, the board is not deciding this matter based on newly enacted regulations that define what constitutes a voluntary vacancy. It's reviewing a decision based on the provisions of Costa-Hawkins itself and case law on when an implied tenancy is created. Ms. Palacios' landlord, the LLC, also argues that the record doesn't support the hearing officer's conclusion that Ms. Palacios had an implied tenancy and the Costa-Hawkins provision on sublessees is inapplicable. In Cobb v. San Francisco, in Cobb versus San Francisco's rent board, the Court of Appeals found that a tenant with an implied tenancy is not a sublessee or assignee on whom the landlord can raise the rent to market under Costa-Hawkins. In Cobb, a son moved in with his mother and stayed on after the mother moved out for health reasons. The landlord found out a few months later that the mother, the tenant under the lease, had moved out. Nevertheless, the landlord directly accepted rent from the son and negotiated a slight rent increase in rent with the son after a few months. A year later, the landlord served the tenant with a rent increase notice based on the same Costa-Hawkins provisions at issue. Court found that the son was not a sublessee or an assignee. Once the mother had moved out, she no longer had a tenancy interest in the lease, so the son could not be her sublessee. And there was no evidence that the mother had manifestly assigned her tenancy to her son, so he was not her assignee. Instead, the court found that Cobb, the landlord, had known that the son was the only tenant in the apartment, had accepted rent, then had negotiated a small increase for him, and Cobb's conduct had created an implied tenancy for the son. Because the son was a tenant in his own right, through an implied tenancy, Cobb could not raise his rent to market the following year by treating him as a sublessee or assignee. Here, instead of a mother and a son, we have Ms. Palacios, who moved in with her friend Irene Bamba, a tenant under a lease, in 2011. When she moved in, she tried to get her name on the lease, but the management company at the time, Roque and Mark, eventually declined to do so. When she tried to pay rent through a joint checking account that she had with Ms. Bamba, Roque and Mark rejected the check and made her pay rent through a money order, which she would drop off at their office. Ms. Palacios testified that Roque and Mark dealt with her for any issues related to maintenance. When the previous owner entered into escrow to sell the property to the current owner, Ms. Palacios listed her name along with Ms. Bamba as tenants in that transaction. Like the mother in Cobb, Ms. Bamba moved out of the unit in 2017 for health reasons. She then passed away the following year in April 2018. Ms. Palacios did not immediately inform the new property management, Westar, for the new owner, of Ms. Bamba's move out But in November 2018, Ms. Morales from Westar approached Ms. Palacios about buying her out. Ms. Palacios testified that she told Ms. Morales at that time that Ms. Bamba had moved out and passed away when she saw that the buyout agreement had both her name and Ms. Bamba's. Nonetheless, she said Ms. Morales told her to sign the agreement, and then when she got the check and she saw that it was made out to both her and Ms. Bamba, she testified that she again reminded Ms. Morales that Ms. Bamba was deceased, and Ms. Palacios testified that Ms. Morales told her that it didn't matter and that she should cash the check, which she did. Several days later, Ms. Palacios reconsidered that decision and canceled the buyout agreement. She then paid Ms. Morales back with a check from her own individual account. At the hearing on this case, the LLC presented an email from Ms. Morales in which she stated that Ms. Palacios had never told her that Ms. Bamba had passed away. Ms. Morales, however, never appeared at the hearing to provide testimony subject to cross-examination. And despite her purported denial, the fact remains that the current owner, through its property manager at the time, agreed to a buyout agreement in which Ms. Palacios was the only signatory and issued a check to her despite that fact. After the buyout agreement fell through, the current owner continued to receive rent from Ms. Palacios, knowing that she was the only occupant in the unit, through its online portal with payments that Ms. Palacios testified came from her own account. In June 2019, the current owner changed management companies to Samo Apartments, the current manager. Samo scrapped the online portal rent payment system. Ms. Palacios testified that she then started paying rent through leftover checks that she had from her joint checking account with Ms. Bamba. Shortly after that, the following month, Samo served her with a 3-day notice because they believed that her son had moved in to the unit as an unauthorized occupant. She responded that her son had only just stayed with her temporarily while his own place was being made ready. During the discussions around the issue with her son, the agent for Samo Apartments said that she realized that Ms. Palacios was the only tenant in the unit. And several months later, Samo Apartments served Ms. Palacios with the rent increase notice under the Costa-Hawkins provision on the sublessees. The hearing officer concluded based on this evidence that the current owner was already aware that Ms. Palacios was the only person in the unit because of the buyout agreement negotiations. and that it accepted rent from her for over a year after knowing that. The hearing officer reasonably found that the facts in the record created an implied tenancy for Ms. Palacios, as in Cobb. And like in Cobb, Ms. Palacios could not be a sublessee since Ms. Bamba had moved out of the unit and then died years before. And there was no evidence that when Ms. Bamba moved out, she manifestly assigned her tenancy to Ms. Palacios. The hearing officer, therefore, correctly concluded that the LLC could not have raised Ms. Palacios' rent using the Costa-Hawkins provision for sublessees and assignees, and that she was entitled to compensation for the excess rent that she had paid.
Thank you, Mr. Mordezai. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for staff at this point? Seeing none, I believe that.
Your comment.
I'm sorry? Do you have a comment?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe that there is a speaker in queue. So is this referring to the staff report, Commissioner Trosas? Just to be clear.
I think she means the discussion. There's a speaker, right?
Yeah, there is.
I want to hear the speaker.
Okay. And I will ask for that. I'm just wondering if anybody has a question regarding the staff report before we do that. Okay. All right, moving on. Mr. Secretary, who was our first speaker?
We have Daniel M. Ilakwa, an attorney representing the tenant. Mr. Ilakwa, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Unless the board decides to allow you to continue further, you have been unmuted.
Whenever you're
ready. Good evening, Vice Chair, and great. Thank you so much. Good evening, Vice Chair, and good evening, members of the board. As was just stated, my name is Daniel Ilakwa. I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Foundation, and I represent the tenant, Ms. Joanna Palacios, in this case. I'm just on this evening to simply state our position in agreeing with the board's staff report on the appeal, and to take any questions that any member might have. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question for that attorney.
Okay, Commissioner Foster, go right ahead.
How long has your client been dealing with this issue?
With the issue of the rent increase?
Yeah.
So the rent was initially increased. She received the notice in a 60-day notice that the rent. So the rent was increased effective February 2020. Currently, I mean, on a separate issue, I guess the city attorney's office is also pursuing criminal charges for violating Penal Code 396 for this rent increase, for whatever that's worth.
Thank you for your reply. Thank you so much.
Any other questions for the speaker, commissioners? Yeah? Okay. Are there any other speakers, Mr. Secretary?
No, there have been no other requests.
Okay, moving on to discussion. Any commissioners like to discuss this? Looks like I saw Commissioner Foster's hand first. I'll go.
Carolyn was ready before, so her and then me would be good.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't, just FYI, I don't know what's going on. Hopefully you can hear me. I have full bars of service, but the connectivity to Blue Jeans seems poor. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Okay. So as far as I'm concerned in reading over this, I think this seems fairly non-controversial to me. I think that I agree with the hearing officer's decision. I agree with Mr. Mordezai that, Cabinda is an unpublished opinion. I don't think we can even cite that. And I think that we have an implied tenancy that was created by the actions of the agent of the landlord. So, I'm ready to vote on this, and I'm pretty resolute in my opinion after reading, on my decision after reading the underlying record that was provided to us as well.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Trosas. Commissioner Foster?
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate and second everything Commissioner Trosas just said, not only on the legal merits of this case, But I feel for this tenant. This kind of pattern of behavior is not productive. It's not warranted, and I move that we affirm the hearing officer's decision and findings of fact and conclusions of law. Post haste.
Second.
Okay. There's been a first
Second.
and a second. Okay. Moving on then to a roll call vote.
Yes, Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Terosis,
Yes.
Commissioner Phyllis.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Duran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, very good. Moving on then. 1 second. Moving on to, it looks like administrative items. No, wrong. Sorry. Last minute. Moving on to public hearings. Find my notes. Everyone knows where we're going faster than I do. Let's see. Public hearings. Here we go.
On 3301, Steve, you got it. Team Steve.
I got this. The board will now hold a public hearing to consider whether to amend Regulation 3301, Subdivision A, to clarify that the dollar amount of the initial rental rate must be all periodic payments and be specified at the outset of the tenancy to be included in the base rent ceiling for purposes of calculating the maximum allowable rent. Can I have a staff report that summarizes the issue, including any recommendations, please?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. As you all know, for post-Costa-Hawkins new tenancies, the landlord can set the initial rental rate at whatever the market will bear. And then following setting the initial rent, all of those subsequent rent increases for that tenancy are governed and limited by the rent control law. So the landlord can set the initial rent, but that has to be set at the commencement of the tenancy per the charter. So if the owner sets that initial rent and then increases the rent outside of what's allowed by the charter, those amounts can be recovered by the tenant as rent overcharges. So this item would amend Regulation 3301 Sub A to clarify that if a landlord wants to itemize certain monthly rental charges for a new tenancy, those must be specified as a dollar amount at the beginning of the tenancy in order for those monthly charges, rental charges, to be included in the base rent ceiling calculation, which is used as the basis for any future general adjustments. This item was initiated because we have been seeing some leases for new tenancies that separate out payment for certain housing services such as master metered water, sewer, or trash without specifying what those monthly charges actually are. So because of that, neither the landlord nor the agency is able to include those charges in the initial rental rate, even though those charges are part of the rent. And so this runs the risk that the landlord will be found to be charging excess rent when it imposes those monthly charges later on down the road. So this proposal will clarify that only those monthly rental charges that are specified as a dollar amount at the outset of the tenancy can be included in the base rent ceiling calculation. And I'm happy to take any questions on this. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Are there any preliminary questions by the commissioners for our general counsel? Seeing none, okay. Are there any members of the public in queue to speak on this subject, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, we have Mr. Kurt Gonska, a member of the public wishing to speak. Mr. Gonska, you will have 5 minutes to address the board unless they decide to allow you to extend your time. You have been unmuted.
Go right ahead, Mr. Gonska.
Hello. Hey, thank you for the time this evening. I'm speaking in support of this amendment. I'm a resident at 937 3rd Street and have been here for almost 2 years, been a Santa Monica resident since 2014. But at this unit that I'm currently renting, this is the first time I've separately been billed for water, sewer, and trash. And my lease specifies a formula to calculate those charges, but it does not specify any dollar amount that I'll be charged for those charges. And so there's no way for me to tell if I'm being correctly billed. Over the course of these almost 2 years, numerous times, I've requested copies of the utility bills that the landlord receives, both from the building manager and also from the actual third-party company that handles the bills. And I've been denied consistently any access to those actual utility bills. So therefore, I have no way to verify if they're billing me properly or not. I became suspicious because just one example is that I'm one of 30 units in our building. We're each charged $28 a month for trash service. So that comes out to almost $850 a month, which I could be wrong, but seems very high to me for one very small dumpster that the building shares. So that was the initial suspicion. There were also some other suspicious things like 2 consecutive months being billed at the exact same dollar amounts for each line item, happening twice, but not every month. So I've requested the copies of the bills from the landlord. I've been denied. Through my research and through conversations with the rent control staff, my understanding is that there is no requirement that the landlord shows tenants copies of utility bills. And furthermore, there's no requirement that the amounts the landlord bills to tenants as pass-throughs for utility bills has any correlation whatsoever to what they're actually paying the utility companies. So in theory, the landlord, and furthermore, that the amount, I've understood that the amounts that I'm billed and that I pay over the course of the term of the initial lease, the average of those become a part of the maximum allowable rent by virtue of me having paid that in the first year or the term of that first lease. So in theory, a landlord could bill me literally any amount he or she wanted. Could be $50 a month, could be $500, could be $5,000 a month. And based upon the terms of the lease, I would be required to pay that. And then after that first year, the term of the lease, that would become part of the maximum allowable rent. So there needs to be more transparency through these kind of master utility bills where the landlords are required to show tenants that they're actually billing what they're only billing up to the amount that they're actually paying out, and that they're not collecting more from tenants for these utility bills than they're actually paying the utility companies and then pocketing the rest over the maximum allowable rent. So that's a basic overview of why I'm interested in this issue and how I came to speak with you tonight on it. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or provide any other information if you guys have those.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gonska. Any questions for Mr. Gonska? Seeing none. Are there any other members of the public in the queue, Mr. Secretary?
No, that was the one request we had.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. Then with public comment concluded, the board will now begin deliberation. Do any members want to open discussion or make a motion? Commissioner Foster.
Yeah, and I was very pleased with how clear and concise this report was written. Allison, thank you so much for your first regulatory change for this board. We are discerning and we love the details, and this was very, very clear and easy for us in the public to all understand. I have absolutely no problem with anything that staff has done and council has done with this regulation update. It needs to be done. That's our job, is to listen to the public and listen to the stakeholders and close loopholes and change and edit things when it changes with the times. This practice is unpredictable and outside of the way we set the base MAR under our charter. It's not our choice to do it this way. It's the way the charter is written. So this regulation change is right in line with that charter intention, and I move that we amend it as staff has presented.
All right.
That we amend Regulation 3301G, Part 2, Part 3, to add per Regulation 3301A, the new rental rate in effect for the tenancy, and to recommend Part D4 to add regulation at the end of the phrase, the new rental rate in effect for the tenancy.
Okay, any other commissioners want to add discussion? No? Okay. Seeing none, I would just like to add that I agree it's very straightforward and it clarifies what is already in effect, which is always a good thing. It creates transparency. It's also a very good thing. So I am in agreement with what Commissioner Foster stated. She's made a motion. Is there any other commissioners who would like to make a second?
I'll second. Apologies for the connectivity.
Okay. I heard Commissioner Trosis with the second. So may we have a roll call vote?
Yes. Commissioner Trosis.
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Phyllis.
Yes.
Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Duran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item number 12, administrative items, the Rent Control Board 2020 Annual Report, a consolidated report which includes the status of the controlled rental housing, impact of market rate vacancies, impact of the Ellis Act, and departmental overviews. Is there anybody who'd like to speak on this subject?
Chair Duran?
Yes.
We have this evening with us, we have information analyst Morena Zelaya, who's going to do the presentation. Before she gets started, I just wanted to comment that as you can tell by having read the annual report, it summarizes the work of the agency as a whole. This has been a very challenging year for everybody, but as you see from the report, we were able to adjust and continue to provide these services that we have done for the past 40 years. The Public Information Department works very hard on this report, gathering information from all of the other divisions, and I want to thank them for their hard work, and I'm looking forward to hearing Ms. Zelaya's presentation.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Zelaya, thank you for coming this evening, and happy to hear your report.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and hello to all the commissioners and all the attendees that are participating. My name is Morena Zelaya. I'm an information analyst with the board, and I'll present the annual report for 2020. Come on, while I just share my screen. Okay, can everyone see?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay, great. So 2020 was a year that brought about many challenges. The agency was able to pivot to meet those challenges quickly and efficiently. This presentation will highlight how the agency was continue providing essential services to the public. The report is broken into 4 parts: status of controlled rental housing, impact of market rate vacancy increase, impact of the Ellis Act, and departmental overview. Rent-controlled housing accounts for slightly more than 1/2 of all housing in Santa Monica and just over 2/3 of multifamily housing. This amounts to 27,429 units subject to rent control. which is a net gain of 48 units compared to 2019. As the pie chart on the right shows, 1- and 2-bedroom apartments comprise the majority of the units, totaling 22,559. And the map on the left shows distribution of controlled units throughout the city.
Marina, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yep.
I don't think that the content sharing is moving along. And also we're seeing your whole screen, not just the slides.
Oh, okay. Let's try this again.
I think you just need to hit the presentation command within the program.
I'm doing the share screen.
Yeah, that's correct. But then within PowerPoint,
Oh,
moving to the presentation.
let's see. Is that doing it?
Have you selected the slideshow? Maybe up on the top there, you see where it says slideshow? On the orange bar?
On the orange bar.
At the top of your screen. On the top of your computer screen.
Yeah.
And see the slideshow?
Is it showing it now?
It's not cooperating with you.
No. It says it's sharing the window.
It is, but it's sharing it within your PowerPoint program. On that left side, it says start with first frame, start with first slide. If you click that, that should start filling up your whole screen with just the slides.
I mean, it's...
You were sharing fine. We just need to move into the presentation mode of PowerPoint.
Yeah, let's see if I can get the board secretary's assistant to try to get him to share it, and then, yeah.
If I can add to this, it looked like you were able to manually move to the second page. I saw the second page come up. If you clicked on it on the left, it did come up in the bigger portion of your screen. I don't know how you did that, but.
Oh, well, actually, let's see. Alvin, if I could just try one more thing.
There you go. There you go.
Well, this is Alvin. This is the secretary sharing.
Okay, I went ahead and stopped sharing.
Okay, how's this?
You've got it. That's it.
Okay. All right.
Sorry about that.
No, thank you for letting me know. I appreciate it. Okay. So, as I was saying, rent-controlled housing accounts for slightly more than 1/2 of all the housing in Santa Monica and just over 2/3 of multifamily housing. So most of that housing is made up of 1- and 2-bedroom units, which account to 22,559 of the 27,429 units that are subject to rent control as of December 31st. So the agency breaks down controlled units into 5 categories. Market rate units, which are units that have post-January 1st, 1999 tenancies. Long-term units, which are units that have pre-January 1st, 1999 tenancies. Section 8 units. Restricted units, which are units where there was a previous owner occupancy eviction, or it's deed restricted, or the MAR is restricted due to severe code violations. And 0 MAR units, which are units that are not used for residential rental purposes or units that are owner occupied. Unfortunately, this year, or in 2020, the number of units with Section 8 fee waivers decreased from the previous year, it went down by 5, though there is always a chance that the number of participants is actually higher, but that landlords didn't apply for a fee waiver. So 73% of units are at market rate, and almost 100 more units became market rate in 2020 than in 2019. So the chart on the right shows median initial rents for 2018 and 2020. And as you can see, median initial rates fell by a rate of 2.8% for studios to $1,895, and by a rate of 1.5% for 2 bedrooms to $3,200 when compared to 2019. This is likely due to pandemic impacts on market rates and what people are willing to pay for apartments. The rates did increase slightly for 1 bedrooms, rising by 1% to $2,475, and increased significantly for 3 or more bedroom units, rising more than 7% to $4,600. Despite all these changes, all the units continue to be at or higher than MARS set in 2018. So it may have gone down from 2019, but you're still seeing very high, record high rents, which will likely continue as pandemic conditions get better and the economy gets back on track. So the market, even with those dips, continues to only cater to the very wealthy. No household earning the area median income for Los Angeles, which is $77,300, could afford even a market rate studio in Santa Monica. And as you can see by comparing the 5th and 7th columns, the income needed to afford any unit at market rate is at least double than what would have been needed had there not been vacancy decontrol. The affordability charts at the bottom show how unit affordability is distributed. As it was last year, units affordable to extremely low incomes are off the chart, as only 6 market rate units in the city continue to be affordable to those incomes, compared to 1,817 units prior to decontrol. This high cost of renting likely is playing a role in the high rates of turnover among the market rate tenants. 81% of tenants who moved in 2015 have already moved out. So Ellis activity was on hold for much of the year because of pandemic-related eviction moratoriums. The city prohibited removals in a March 18th emergency order, though it was lifted later on in the year. So just 6 properties received notices of intent to withdraw in 2020, and that represented 11 units. 4 of the properties are single-family dwellings and 2 are multifamily properties. 2 of those single-family dwellings completed the process in 2020. In addition to those, 46 units that began the Ellis process in 2019 completed it in 2020. However, 2 properties with 12 units that began the withdrawal process in 2019 continue to be occupied even though the 1-year period has expired because the city's eviction moratorium and protections for Santa Monica students and educators.
Would you mind clicking on the hide on that box that's obscuring some of the data on your screen?
Oh, yep. Sorry about that. So 6 properties amounting to 31 units were re-rented during 2020. This was more units that were returned than what were returned in 2019 when only 20 units were re-rented. This amounted to a net loss of 17 units for the year. 3 of the 6 properties returned last year were withdrawn more than 10 years ago, and then the other 3 were withdrawn within the last 10 years, one in 2011, another in 2016, and the last in 2019. So as you can see from the map on the right, Ellis Act withdrawals occur throughout the entire city. The green dots represent properties that are currently withdrawn, and the blue dots represent properties that received notices of intent in 2020. So 2 properties each in areas A and B, and 1 each in areas E and F received notices of intent in 2020, and areas C, D, and G did not receive notices of intent. So as you can see from the darker shaded larger areas of this pie chart, most L-list properties are being used for some sort of residential use, whether it be apartments or condominiums, single-family dwellings. That's the most popular reuse for these properties. And the most popular way or the most popular post-Ellis use is to demolish a property and then to build condominiums or single-family dwellings. So while properties are being withdrawn, for the most part, they are being brought back in some sort of housing format. So now I'll give some departmental overviews about staff activity in 2020. City Hall's closing contributed to an overall decrease in public contacts with Public Information Department. Public contacts were down from 15,176 in 2019 to 11,690. However, staff successfully took advantage of available technology to ensure prompt attention to the public. Email contacts increased 150% from 2019, and the public was also encouraged to sign up to receive mass email blasts from our office, of which there were 17 last year. Usage of the agency's website remains high. Website views rose from 90,315 to 94,009, and most visits continued to be for the newly augmented Look Up a Rent page. The regular schedule of seminars was suspended. However, staff still presented the annual Landlord-Tenant Forum in collaboration with the City Attorney's Office and included the city's planning department this year. Along with all that, staff also participated in several interdepartmental groups, including a staff member acts as Department Operations Center Coordinator in weekly meetings with the city's Emergency Operations Center. Another staff member represents the agency at the city's monthly senior task force meeting. And multiple staff members met regularly with the city's Office of Communications in preparation for the transition to the city's new website. So while a temporary pause was placed on the acceptance of new petitions from mid-March through early May, as staff worked on adapting processes to teleworking, mediations and hearings continued uninterrupted by telephone and video conference. Investigations also continued and are conducted remotely. About half as many decreases were filed in 2020 than in 2019, as shown on the graph on the page. So 44 versus 80 the previous year. A higher percentage, however, were successfully mediated, 63% from 56%. And construction decrease notices were issued in 19 properties in 2020, and 11 petitions were filed on 7 of those properties. And 91% of those petitions were successfully mediated during 2020. So one part of the legal department's many duties includes tracking buyout agreements. Buyout agreements are required to be registered with the city, and of the 22 filings received in 2020, we saw that the average buyout amount dropped from $40,807 to $35,693. That may have been due in part to tenants' unwillingness to move out during the pandemic, along with landlords' concerns about the ability to replace tenants should a landlord approach a tenant about possibly vacating in exchange for a buyout. The board received applications for owner-occupied exemptions for 9 properties in 2020, which was down from 14 in 2019. And due to monitoring of owner-occupied exempt properties, This successfully returned 28 properties, totaling 68 units to rent control protections. So that was a relatively brief overview, and if anyone would like more information, the report will be available on our website for download. And if they have any questions, they can obviously contact an information coordinator or analyst and ask to speak to us. We're available Monday through Thursday and every other Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we return phone calls and emails outside of those hours as well. And now I will take your questions, if any.
Thank you, Ms. Ayala. Let's see. It looks like Commissioner Trosis has her hand up for questions. Go right ahead.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So first of all, congratulations on putting this together. I know it's, a huge endeavor, and it's super, super helpful. Can you guys hear me okay? So sorry. So thank you for the presentation. Why do you think, I know that you said, like, due to the fact that we are remote, you thought we had a higher percentage of successful mediations this year. But, I'm a proponent of mediation. I think that it helps to more quickly resolve some of these cases that we have pending. Are there lessons learned from the success rate of our mediations that we can employ in the future? Post-pandemic or post-virtual, or in our new and better normal? What are those lessons, and can we deploy them?
So I think for this type of question, I will actually defer to the hearings department manager because she is more in tune with sort of what the processes have been and how our mediator has been able to work with landlords and tenants to try to get all of these successfully resolved. I would say that likely, the fact that, in my opinion, the fact that we're doing all of this remotely may assist in that. People, not being in each other's presence may keep people a little more willing to hear each other out. But I would like to see and hear if Ms. Nalaboff has any insight into that.
Ms. Nalaboff, feel free, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. We have a number of different types of cases that are referred to mediation as a matter of course. Some cases just aren't suitable for mediation, so they never do. But in terms of decreases, construction decreases, excess rents, anybody can opt out of mediation, but we do send all of those to mediation as our default. And you'll see if you read all the details in the hearings section of the report, some types of cases have a higher resolution rate than others. This year, as Morena said, the construction decrease petitions, 91% of those successfully mediated and did not go to hearing. And that's really great because those are the most time-consuming and staff-consuming types of cases that we have, usually requiring multiple hearings. So we're very happy about that. Regular decreases, majority of those were resolved either fully or partially. Excess rent this year, we didn't have that many cases, so it maybe wasn't a representative year. About half of those were fully resolved and didn't have to go to hearing. So it varies year by year. It depends what kinds of cases we have. This year, quite a few of the excess rent cases raised some somewhat novel issues or unusual issues, and those sometimes don't settle as readily as the more standard ones. So I think our mediation program is really strong, but it does depend a lot on the kinds of cases and the kinds of parties.
Thank you, Ms. Nalaboff. That was helpful. And speaking of construction decrease petitions, I heard you say that there were 19 properties where we had a construction decrease petition, or not you, sorry, but I'm wondering how many means and methods plans did we have incorporated into any sort of relocation due to construction? I'm just wondering because I see a lot of construction happening around the city, and I'm concerned. When we hear from our constituents, when they come to us, it's already past the point of incorporating that means and methods plan. And I'm just wondering, is that something? I know we put that in place, several years ago, but is anyone actually using that process?
Is that a question for me?
Well, I mean,
try and answer it.
Anyone who could answer it, we were chatting, but whoever could answer it is fine.
Well, I think what Ms. Elias said was that we sent out agency notices on 19 properties, right? Yep. That means when we hear that there's construction happening, somebody informs us, we send a notice to all the tenants and the owners saying, we have this law, and if you want to mediate or you want help, we can help you. Otherwise, tenants can file petitions. So you should know about this. And I think this year there were petitions actually filed on 11 properties representing, I forget how many units. Now, most of those do have permits taken out, and then they do have means and method plans. If not initially, they do eventually. And, I'd say there's greater or lesser success in compliance with the plans, depending the nature of the type of construction and that sort of thing. We try and do what we can to have within our law to use those plans as a method of how we judge compliance. But, that's not part of our law.
Right. Yes. Thank you for alluding to those challenges. All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Foster, go ahead.
While we're on that topic, further down in the same chart on construction decrease petitions for 2020, I wanted to ask you about the 25 that are pending from prior years. I'm concerned that the complaints we've heard from tenants and some of the bad examples we've seen around town, certainly not all, but of the ones that do seem to be out of control or taking too long, and bordering on harassment and real disturbance of quiet enjoyment, that's a big number. 25 petitions still left over from prior years. Are we continuing to meet with code and building and safety to discuss policy on allowing such extensive construction on occupied buildings on a voluntary basis? I feel like something's getting missed here. Lynn, what do you think? Tracy?
I can take that.
Yeah, I think Tracy could address that.
Yes, we are continuing to meet with other city departments that address construction-related issues. We have been doing that ongoing, and now that Ms. Regan is with us, we will be, continuing that. And it is something that we're very concerned about. We see how this type of construction can impact tenants in place when work is going on around them. So this is a collaborative effort, and we are working closely with the planning department, code enforcement, and the city attorney's office on this and a number of other issues.
Can we put together, Tracy, has anyone discussed putting together a task force to figure out like a solution here? Because I would be interested in talking to council about putting together a task force.
They're replacing the neighborhood preservation coordinator now. That position has to be reworked.
Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately, the neighborhood preservation coordinator, that position was lost in the city's restructuring, and she played a significant role in the monitoring of people who were temporarily relocated, and that was a key role that she played. They are trying to fill in for that, but it will be very helpful if that position is refilled. And yes, I mean, whether we call it a task force or a committee or a regular, I mean, we did call it a task force in the past, and we had some objectives that we were focused on, specifically around some Ellis monitoring some years ago. But I think the collaborative efforts with the other departments could morph into a task force if that was what we wanted to call it, but we will be continuing those efforts.
I wanted to ask another question about the report in general. I find it, I always call this must-read TV. But for instance, all of these charts that give the current year's number of petitions filed, I mean, for whichever one it is, number of petitions filed, I, for one, would always like to see how it compares to last year, for instance, because sometimes, unless I go dig out last year's report and the year before's report, the charts that include at least some small allusion to a percentage increase or decrease in the same category year over year is very, very helpful. So just seeing it described just for this year only doesn't necessarily tell me how it compares. Are things getting better? Are things getting worse as compared to prior years? So that would be helpful. But otherwise, yeah, it's full of information. I know a lot of us have shared it widely with other concerned parties all over the city. And thank you so much for the presentation.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ayala, for your report, and for all the staff who spent, I'm sure, hundreds of hours compiling all the information to put it together. Thank you for all your efforts. If nothing else, oh, go ahead, Ms. Connie.
So just before we move on, I assume that the board would like us to forward this to the City Council. We are required by the charter to report on the condition of the housing stock each year, and this is the method by which we do it. So I will forward the report to the council members and senior city staff next week.
Fantastic. Do we need to do some kind of vote to make that happen, or you're just going to do that?
We will do that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Trosis, what were you going to say?
I was going to say you can politely tell them that Commissioner Trosis is interested in a task force to, or some sort of group to better stream, and again, not just talking, but doing something differently, because I feel like for the last 5 years now, it's a continual issue that hasn't been resolved. So anyways, you can forward it and tell them they'll be hearing from me.
All right.
Probably just did. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on to administrative item 12B, which is the mid-year budget report for fiscal year 2020 and 2021. Condon, do you want to take the lead?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So this is just an information item for the board to update you on our financial experience at the end of December 2020. As you saw, the report itself is quite detailed, so I'm just going to give you a summary. In June of 2020, the board adopted a budget, 2021 budget, that was essentially balanced with a small projected deficit of $34,600. At mid-year, our revenue that we had collected was almost equal to what we had projected to collect for the whole year, which is not unusual because registration fees have to be paid at the beginning of the year. We did have higher interest earnings this year than we have in other years, and we are projecting that by the end of the year, our revenue will exceed what was originally projected by about $53,500. Expenditures at mid-year for most line items are in line with the amounts projected. Primarily due to changes in staffing or personnel, we're now projecting that by the end of the year, expenditures in the salaries and wages category of the budget will exceed our anticipated expenditures by about $118,000. Savings projected in the other two budget categories, supplies and expenses, and capital outlay, will offset almost half of those salary-related over expenditures. And currently, it appears that by year end, our expenses may exceed those budgeted by about $53,000. So the bottom line is, given the increase in revenue and the increase in expenditures, it looks like the deficit at the end of the year will be about $5,000 higher than we originally projected, or about $39,360. And any deficit at the end of the year will be covered by the board's cash reserves. So that's a summary. I'm happy to answer any questions. And we will be coming to you with the next year's budget in May. Are there any questions?
Anyone? Commissioner Foster, and then Commissioner Trosis.
Yeah, thank you for that report, Tracy. I just want to say, I say it every year. I know of no budget in the land that is ever always so close to on target as I've seen my sixth budget, or mid-year report, I think, and I am just floored by your accuracy and transparency. And even when we err a tiny bit in the red, it's still for reasonable and expected reasons. And so we really appreciate the experience and leadership that contributes to such a well-run use of the stakeholders' funds. So thank you.
Thank you. I have to give credit to Ms. Noseworthy. She is the budget person, and she works at it as detailed as she does with everything that she does. But her experience really allows her to be right on, as you suggest, Commissioner Foster. So thank you to Ms. Noseworthy.
Great. Commissioner Trosis, go ahead.
Ms. Condon, can you just explain to me, just so that I'm clear, do we think that this deficit that we're experiencing for this year could be, in part because of these salaries and wages that were over what we anticipated, or why are we seeing this deficit?
Well, it has to do with some unexpected departures and some things that happened along the way. In the spring, we had 2 vacant positions, and when we budgeted for those positions, we anticipated that we would be hiring people at the entry-level step. Each of our positions have 5 steps. We were very fortunate in that we were able to fill both of those positions with city employees who would have otherwise been laid off in the city's restructuring. But based upon their experience, they were hired at higher steps on the salary grid. Similarly, we had the general counsel retire and the board secretary retire. There were some additional costs in terms of overlapping of positions, so that for training. I don't foresee that happening again, but sometimes those things happen. Fortunately, savings in other areas will make up for those over expenditures. And then the other thing was as we're preparing for replacement of the database, the person who has maintained our old system is staying until we do the conversion, but we fortunately have been able to hire the new person so that he is now working with us on the team, and we have those 2 overlapping. But in this matter, I think it's helpful to have that. So we have some additional costs this year that I do not foresee in the future.
Thanks for that explanation. And are we feeling confident? My next question was going to be about the database. So thanks for mentioning that. I see that we haven't expended all of the funding that we set aside for that, and that we might not. When do we anticipate this actual conversion to occur? And then how confident are we in the retirement of our current person that the new individual is going to be able to assume all these responsibilities? How long has he or she been on board, and when are we doing the conversion?
All right. We are making progress on the database. It's a very labor-intensive job because we are converting many of our processes into workflows, and it's not something that we had done before. And, anybody that's using a more modern system understands that process. Our database had none of that in it. So we spent a good year going through all of our processes, and it's, analyzing them step by step. That was the first year. Now we're into the second year with the hardcore programming being done by our partners, True Point Solution. We're making progress on it, but it's very detailed. We have to test everything very, very carefully. We're doing working on data conversion, and also all the reports that need to be generated out of the system. So it is my hope that we will move to the conversion before the end of 2021. That is our goal. And yes, I'm glad that we have the new person on with us now. We are working on training that person. Both our partner is helping train that person, and also we're looking for additional supplemental training so that he will be able to maintain the system going forward. We're doing something a little differently in that we are partnering with the city's Information Services Department in hiring this person. So he is actually a member of the city's Information Services Department, but devoted to our project directly. So he has all of the support and backing of the city's Information Services Department as well. And they're good partners with us. They've since we hired him in January, we've been meeting regularly with other people within that department as well. And I think this will be a good plan going forward. And, you know, we will make sure that we have the support necessary before we do the conversion. But our goal is to do it before the end of this year.
Got it. Thank you for that update. That was helpful.
You're welcome.
I have no further. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, very good. Seeing nothing else, moves us to item number 16. Before I go there, I just want to remind everyone that the next Rent Control Board meeting will be on April the 8th, 2021 at 7 p.m. via teleconference. Being said that, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, there's a first and by Commissioner Foster, second by Commissioner Chorosis. Did we need to do a roll call vote?
We have been, yes.
Okay. Mr. Secretary?
Yes. Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Commissioner Chorosis.
Yes.
Commissioner Phyllis.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Duran.
Yes. Thank you all for attending. See you next time.
Thanks,
Thank
Steve.
you,
Bye, guys.
everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.